Oh, this is a video M15U3A1. Create a video presentation. Okay, include the main ideas from number one. Okay, so the first section we were asked to read a number, quite a large number of documents. And so some of the main readings, some of the main ideas from that were colonized countries disdain languages other than what they were colonized with. At least that's the theory. That was come from Darters. She also pushed the culture forgetting. That these things called cultures of forgetting are when you are learning a second language or learning non-native language, or you're in a foreign country and you're learning a non-native language other than your own, and especially when you're young, you will tend to forget not just your language, but parts of your culture. Because another thing that we learned from these documents was language and culture are inexplicably linked. There are parts that come through in language. There's culture that comes through in language that's more than just words. There's meanings, and there's deeper understandings that translation will not convey. Let's see what else we learned. There's also a neoliberal shift in education to focus on reading and math and English. Very heavily focused on standardized tests, mostly due to Common Core, which is causing more issues, for this multi-language learning. Bi or multilingual education is scant. There's not a lot of education that supports two languages. Multi-language education provides learners with deeper understanding and better learning, not just in the languages department, but also in other subjects. We had a number of charts from, I think it was ICS, where you had the bilingual Spanish-English classes. They ran parallel together. And the students were much better off than in other subjects. Students who are allowed to practice or are taught, with these supports of their mother tongue in school are often better adjusted as well. There's not as much stress. I guess they're fuller people. Fuller students is what I want to say. And then moving on to the next one, the power dynamics, number two. So I identified two papers. One of them was Haewon Jung. He wrote a paper about essentially the history of Korean language and how it's being utilized today. It's called Korea's Linguistic Policies, Status and Challenges. And so he lays out a number of things. He just gives us, I'm going to give you a basic rundown, what he talks about. And then I'll compare that to my second document. So here we are. Until 1989, Korea didn't have any organization or dedicated linguistic policies. Korea was actually under the Ministry of Culture. They were the ones that they did literature and educational printing. They were responsible for the policies, although they're relatively scant. After this, Korean Language Policy Bureau was charged with formulating and implementing the Korea's policies. Because they found it so important, we need to shift this from just, kind of a subcategory to something more important. So they made an entire language policy bureau, and then they even created a deliberation organization called the Korean Language Deliberation Council. It's an advisory body that reports to the Ministry of Culture, which consists of language experts from academic and industrial spheres who deliberate on key issues regarding the Korean language. So, and to move forward a little bit, in 2005, Korea created the Framework Act on the Korean language to further strengthen the language and its usage, and how far they want to implement it within the country and the culture. And they provide the legal basis for all Korean policies and research. They produce frameworks for Korean learning and disseminating the Korean language. A lot of study material comes directly from this bureau. Um, so continuing on, like Korea finds their language to be very, very important. So much so that they're not just pushing it domestically, or in like the traditional ways. They're also pushing it in technical ways. So since the 1990s, they've been working on informatization of Korean language. Basically, this refers to the processing of Korean materials in a way that's compatible with IT processing, um, including search engine optimization, machine translation, voice recognition, and professional searches. So they're continuing to work with it. It's not just a language for them. It's actually something that they continually push. So that was the one document kind of giving you some general details or some general information about how Korea sees its language. It sees it as very important. It's an ongoing process. It's being updated. It's being modernized, and so on. And now there's a a link that I have. It's called BTS and EXO: The Soft Power Roots of K-pop. So this is the article that we were asked to find. And basically, in this article, what it's saying is, since the Korea was colonized by the Japanese, and during that time they lost a lot of their culture. They were the colonizers were trying to get rid of their language, and to essentially turn them Japanese. Obviously, that didn't work. But instead of them losing their language to Japanese, they retained it when they continued up. Fast forward into the was it the 90s? Yeah, fast forward into the 90s. You had this Hallyu, or the Korean wave of culture that came out, and it came out through K-pop, which was this massive explosion of just like Korean music everywhere. It was kind of weird to hear Korean music outside of the country, but it was really big for them, and this was planned. South Korea's government targeted the export of popular media culture as a new economic initiative, one of the major sources of foreign revenue that was vital for the country's economic survival and advancement. So, out of the 1980s, you had major economic issues, and Korea's answer was, you know what? Let's export. Let's export entertainment. And so what they did was they worked with this Korea Language Bureau to push. I think there was funding from there to push these K-pop bands and whatever, and then they were going to sell the music. And I don't think anyone thought it would take off as well as it did. And so now who has not heard of Psy and Gangnam Style and whatnot? So I told you that to tell you this. Let me get my notes. Many countries, this is to tie this back in with what we were talking about. My own experience, from what I've seen, is like you have very, very strong Korean language policies, not just for the natives, but you also have it for foreigners as well. To stay in the country, one of the ways is to get a number of points, and then you can get a different visa. To get these points, you have to take Korean language classes and culture classes and whatnot. So, for them. For myself, like Korea is a very strong language that's being pushed, not just in like say the Hallyu wave or like K-pop and whatever, but also in K-dramas, and domestically through culture programs and whatnot. Yeah, so to tie all this back to the readings that we had, Darter, I don't want to say it's a complaint, but it's an assertion that I think has merit, but I don't think it has merit in this situation. Whereas Darter is asserting that colonizers will push the new language onto the colonized, and the colonized will accept the new language, and they'll use it take it as their own. Because it's seen as fashion forward, not fashion forward, but it's seen as like modern and whatnot. Korea's done the opposite. They were a country that was colonized, and then they rejected their colonizers. Not only did they reject the colonizers, they rejected their culture, the colonizers' culture, and then they promulgated their own language so well that the world knows about it right now. They purposely set it up as a means of economic, export for themselves to boost the country. So getting back to Darter, she's saying that it's being overruled by foreign power. Well, it doesn't really stand here in Korea. Koreans have embraced the language. They found excellent ways to support it through K-pop and K-dramas. Um, her experience, her experience when she was younger, she talks about not being allowed to speak Spanish. I'm pretty sure a lot of Koreans, felt the same way, when they were, being colonized. But the difference between the two is that you have Korea is like, no, we're going to export this and we're going to make this, a method of a way of means of income. Whereas, her example, she didn't really follow up on it, or maybe her situation was a little different as well because she was a foreigner in one country who did not speak the language. But I think you also have to look at the time of that. The 1950s is probably when she was going through school. So she didn't really have any kind of globalization happening at that time, or very little. And so everything was, at least domestically in the States, was all very Americanized and, go America and all that. So, yeah, I felt I thoroughly explained, kind of tied like Darter's understanding and her assertions to like what's happening here in Korea. And I feel that her assertions don't really stand up under scrutiny. So this concludes my video.